in the far reaches of the galaxy, where countless species lived and thrived. The Author Empire stood out, known for their advanced technology and rich culture. The Author ruled over several star systems with wisdom and strength. But their queen, Zalra, was different from many of her ancestors. She was not just a ruler. She was a visionary, someone who saw beyond mere power and sought wisdom in the world around her. Zalra's search for a partner was unlike any that had come before. As queen, she could have married any warrior, scientist, or noble in her empire. But she desired something else. She wanted a partner who could see the world as she did, someone who valued intellect, diplomacy, and understanding above all else. Someone who wasn't blinded by arrogance or pride. Her advisors suggested she marry a fellow author noble, someone strong and influential. But Zalra was not interested in power or influence. She wanted a connection that went beyond politics. So, when the invitation to Earth arrived, she hesitated at first. Earth was considered a backwater planet by most of the galaxy's advanced species. It was primitive, and its inhabitants were often seen as simple and unrefined. But there was something about Earth that intrigued Zalra. The humans, despite their primitive technology, had a reputation for being resilient, intelligent, and creative. And so, she decided to meet with one of their diplomats and ambassador named Marcus Flynn. Marcus was a simple man, and to many, that was his greatest strength. He wasn't rich, nor did he come from any noble background. He was a career diplomat, chosen because of his calm demeanor, cleverness, and ability to think on his feet. Marcus was not a man who sought attention. He did his job quietly, efficiently, and with great care. And though Earth was not a powerful player in the galactic politics, Marcus had gained the respect of many leaders for his honesty and straightforward approach to diplomacy. When Zalra first met him, she was struck by how different he was from the others. He was tall, with dark brown hair and eyes that seemed to look straight through her. Yet he never made her feel uncomfortable. His smile was genuine, and his voice carried a calm authority without being forceful. She had expected him to be brash or overly eager to impress her, but instead, he seemed almost shy. He didn't talk about the greatness of Earth or the potential of humankind. Instead, he spoke about the importance of listening, of understanding before acting. Zalra was taken aback. She had never met anyone quite like him. There was no pride in his voice, no arrogance in his actions. He was simply a man who knew his place in the galaxy, but he did not let that define him. Their conversation lasted for hours, and by the end of it, Zalra found herself more intrigued than ever. This man, this humble diplomat from Earth, seemed to possess the very qualities she had been seeking for years. His words were thoughtful, and his insights into the galaxy were surprisingly deep for someone from such a primitive world. She felt a sense of peace in his presence, a feeling she had never experienced with any of her own people. As the conversation drew to a close, Marcus stood to leave. He offered her a respectful bow, but Zalra could see the flicker of a smile on his face, a sign of the warmth that lay beneath his professional exterior. "Thank you, Queen Zalra," Marcus said, his voice gentle but firm. "It was an honor to speak with you." The moment the door closed behind him, Zalra was left with a feeling she hadn't expected, an odd sense of disappointment. She had been looking for a partner, someone to share her vision of a peaceful and prosperous future for the galaxy. But the more she thought about Marcus, the more she realized that he might just be the one. Over the next few weeks, Zalra couldn't shake the thought of Marcus from her mind. She found herself thinking about their conversations, replaying his words in her mind. She had met countless leaders and diplomats in her lifetime, but none had left an impression like he had. His humility, his intelligence, and his quiet strength were qualities she admired. But could such a man really be the partner she sought? Was he truly the one who could stand beside her, not just as a ruler but as an equal? It was not long before Zalra invited Marcus to join her for a private meeting, this time without any formalities. She wanted to know more about him, to understand the man who had so captivated her attention. When they met again, she could see the same calmness in his demeanor, but there was something different in his eyes, something more personal. as if he had been expecting this moment. "I've been thinking about our last conversation," Zalra began, her voice soft. "You are not like the others, Marcus. You have a wisdom that transcends what I've come to expect from the people I've met." Marcus smiled faintly, but there was no hint of pride in it. "I'm just a man, Your Majesty. Like anyone else, I have my strengths and weaknesses. But I believe that every person has something valuable to offer, no matter where they come from." Zalra nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She had never met anyone who spoke like he did, so humble yet so certain of himself. It was a quality she admired deeply. As the days passed, their meetings became more frequent, and the bond between them grew. Zalra had never felt so connected to anyone before. She found herself laughing at Marcus's jokes, even though they were often simple, and she enjoyed the quiet moments they shared in each other's company. Soon, the people of the Author Empire began to take notice of their growing relationship. They watched as their queen, once so focused on her duties, seemed to find joy in the simplest of things she had never paid attention to before. The Author were a proud species, known for their high standards and meticulous ways, but even they couldn't help but notice the quiet strength and humility that Marcus brought into their queen's life. Then, one day, Marcus took a step that surprised even Zalra. He asked her to marry him. It was not with grand words or elaborate gestures. There was no royal ceremony or declaration of great love. It was a simple question, asked in the same quiet way he had approached everything else in their relationship. "I would be honored," he said, "to stand beside you as your partner, if you'll have me." Zalra felt a rush of emotions: joy, fear, excitement all at once. She had never imagined this moment would come, but now that it had, she realized that she had never wanted anything more. "Yes, Marcus," she replied, her voice steady. "I would be honored as well." And so, Zalra and Marcus Flynn were married. It was a union that shocked many in the Author Empire. The Queen, known for her sharp intellect and powerful leadership, had chosen a simple man from a distant planet to be her husband. It was a decision that would change the course of their lives and, perhaps, the galaxy itself. But for now, Zalra felt a peace she had never known. In Marcus, she had found more than a partner. She had found someone who would walk beside her, not because of power or status, but because of something deeper, something that transcended the politics and the pride of the galaxy, something truly extraordinary. In the early days of their marriage, life between Queen Zalra and Marcus Flynn was surprisingly peaceful. Their union, once seen as unusual, had quickly become a symbol of harmony across the Author Empire. Zalra's people, initially skeptical of the human diplomat, had grown to respect him. They admired how he carried himself with quiet confidence and never sought attention, even though his presence by her side was undeniable. Marcus had been welcomed into the Author court, and life seemed to flow as smoothly as it had in the past, but with the addition of a new, subtle warmth. Zalra's advisors continued to press her to focus on the larger issues of the Empire, to prepare for the challenges that always loomed on the horizon. The Author Empire was vast, and no matter how peaceful things appeared, there was always the threat of war or political upheaval. But Zalra was content in the quiet moments she shared with Marcus. In his presence, she felt calm, a feeling she had not experienced in years of rule. He was grounded, always reminding her to stay present in the moment. They spent most of their time together walking the gardens of the royal palace, or sharing meals in private, away from the distractions of court life. Sometimes, Marcus would play simple music on an instrument he had brought with him from Earth. It wasn't grand or elaborate music, but it was enough to fill the space between them with a kind of magic that words couldn't express. He would often smile at her and say, "Sometimes the simplest things bring the greatest joy." Zalra had found a peace she didn't even know she was searching for, but it would not last forever. One day, a sudden message from the royal fleet changed everything. A distress signal had come in from the Author outpost on the edge of their territory. A nearby star system, inhabited by a species known as the Orcs, had launched an unprovoked attack. The Orcs were aggressive, warlike species who had long been a thorn in the side of the Author Empire. But they had never dared to launch an open strike before. Their sudden aggression was a sign that something had shifted in the galaxy. The Author military immediately sprang into action. But the situation was far from simple. Zaura called for an emergency meeting with her advisors. The palace was filled with a sense of urgency as the news spread. The Carracks were known for their brutal tactics and overwhelming numbers. The Author, despite their advanced technology, had always struggled to outmaneuver them in battle. Zaura's mind raced as she tried to formulate a strategy that would save her people. She knew that the best course of action was to prevent further bloodshed. But the Carracks wouldn't listen to reason. They never did. As the meeting continued, Zaura's thoughts kept drifting to Marcus. He had always been there for her, supporting her decisions without question. But this time, she wasn't sure what to do. The situation felt too urgent, too dangerous. She had led her people through countless challenges, but this was different. The Carracks weren't like the other species they had dealt with. They respected power, and sometimes negotiation was not enough. After the meeting, Zaura sought out Marcus. She found him in the quiet of the palace garden, as she often did when she needed to clear her mind. He was sitting on a bench, looking up at the stars, his hands folded in his lap. He glanced at her as she approached, and she could see the worry in her eyes reflected in his. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. Zaura sat down beside him, feeling the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. She looked at him, trying to find the right words. "The Carracks have attacked one of our outposts," she said softly. "Our people are in danger, and we need to respond quickly. But I fear that a direct confrontation will only lead to more bloodshed. I'm not sure what to do." Marcus didn't speak for a long time. He simply watched the stars, his brow furrowed in thought. Zaura waited, knowing that when Marcus finally spoke, it would be with the kind of clarity she needed. "The Carracks don't respect weakness," Marcus said quietly, "and they won't listen to words. They only understand strength, and if you want to save your people, you might need to show them that strength, but not just through weapons. You might need to show them that you can beat them at their own game." Zaura turned to him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes the most powerful weapon is not the one you use to destroy, but the one you use to outsmart," Marcus explained. "The Carracks might be stronger than you in numbers, but they're predictable. They don't think beyond their own tactics. If you can outmaneuver them, show them that you've thought 2 steps ahead, they'll back down. But it has to be a bold move." Zaura thought about his words. He was right. The Carracks relied heavily on brute force, and they often underestimated their enemies. Perhaps it wasn't about having the strongest weapon, but rather using the right strategy at the right time. "But how do I do that?" Zaura asked, unsure. Marcus smiled slightly, a knowing look in his eyes. "I think I can help with that." The next day, Marcus joined Zaura in her war room. He had been quietly analyzing the Carracks' movements, studying their past battles and strategies. Zaura had always trusted his judgment, but she had no idea just how much Marcus had learned during his time as a diplomat. As the hours passed, he worked with the Author generals, quickly gaining their respect. His calm approach to problem-solving was something they hadn't expected, but it was exactly what they needed. Together, they developed a plan that would strike at the heart of the Carracks' forces. Rather than engaging in a full-scale battle, Zaura and Marcus decided to use the element of surprise. They would disable the Carracks' fleet's communication systems, making it impossible for them to coordinate their attack. The Author would then move in, cutting off their supply lines and forcing them to surrender without a fight. Zaura was amazed at how quickly Marcus adapted to the military strategy. She had always seen him as a man of peace, someone who could talk his way out of any situation. But now, she was seeing a different side of him, a side that was calculating, decisive, and capable of leading in times of crisis. "Are you sure about this?" Zaura asked as they finalized the plan. "It's a risky move." Marcus met her gaze, his eyes steady. "Sometimes, Your Majesty, the only way to avoid destruction is to show them that they've already lost, before the battle even begins." As the Author fleet prepared to move out, Zaura felt a new sense of determination. Marcus had opened her eyes to a strategy that she hadn't considered before. His experience in negotiation had given him a unique perspective on warfare. And now, more than ever, Zala realized that Marcus wasn't just a modest man who had come into her life. He was someone who could change the course of history, someone who could help her protect the author people and bring peace where it had once seemed impossible. The first stage of the plan began to unfold. In the quiet life Zala had known with Marcus was about to become a distant memory. What awaited them was a challenge like no other, a battle for survival, a test of strategy, and a chance to show the galaxy that strength go. The first wave of their plan began with precision, much like Marcus had predicted. The author fleet moved into position, quietly slipping past the Carrick's defenses. Their ships cloaked and invisible to the enemy's sensors. The author were masters of technology, but the Carricks relied heavily on brute force. The author's strategy was not to overpower the enemy. It was to outthink them, to stay one step ahead. And Marcus, with his calm understanding of strategy and diplomacy, was the key to making this plan work. Zala stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the stars drift by as the ships took their positions. There was a certain calmness to her demeanor now. The worry that had once clouded her mind was replaced with a focused determination. She trusted Marcus, and now, more than ever, she was beginning to see just how much he could offer her. He had shown her that there was more than one way to win a battle. That strength could be wielded in ways she had never imagined. As the fleet moved into position, Zala returned to Marcus, who stood by her side. His eyes were fixed on the tactical map, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked the same as he always did, calm, steady, and unassuming. But beneath that calm exterior was a mind that had already planned every move, every countermeasure, and every step of their strategy. It was a side of Marcus that Zala had never seen before. She had known him as a diplomat, a man of peace. But now she was starting to understand that there was much more to him than that. "Are you ready?" she asked softly, though she already knew the answer. Marcus glanced at her, a brief smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I've been ready for a long time." Zala nodded, feeling a surge of confidence. They had a chance to defeat the Carricks without a full-scale battle, to avoid the bloodshed that so often came with war. But there was always the possibility that things would go wrong, that the Carricks would outsmart them, or that they would retaliate with force before the author had a chance to execute the final stage of their plan. As the minutes ticked by, Zala felt the tension rising in the pit of her stomach. She was used to being in control, to being the one who made the decisions. But this time, it felt different. She was relying on Marcus's strategy, his ability to think through every scenario. And so far, it seemed to be working. Suddenly, an alarm sounded, and the quiet calm of the bridge was shattered. The Carrick's fleet had detected something. A flicker of a signal, a minor glitch in their communication systems. The author fleet was still cloaked, but the Carricks were beginning to respond. "They're onto us," one of the author officers said, his voice tense. They found something. Zala's heart skipped a beat. The Carricks were not easy to outwit. They were known for their relentless pursuit of victory, and their ability to adapt to changing circumstances was legendary. But Marcus remained calm, his eyes scanning the data streams with quiet intensity. "Stay focused," Marcus said, his voice steady. "This is where the real test begins. Prepare to activate the secondary jamming system." Zala was amazed at how composed Marcus was. Even in the face of danger, it was as if he had anticipated this moment, as if he had already calculated every move. She glanced at the tactical map, and for the first time, she realized that Marcus had seen this possibility before. He had planned for the Carricks to detect them, and he had prepared a backup plan. "We're going to give them just enough to think they've found us," Marcus continued. "But it won't be enough to let them break through. As soon as they make their move, we'll cut off their communication entirely." Zala nodded, her confidence growing. Marcus had thought of everything. He had turned their apparent weakness into their strength. The Carricks were predictable. They would go after the first sign of weakness, the first crack in the armor, and Marcus was ready to exploit that weakness. The author fleet held their breath as the Carrick's ships began to move into position, preparing to strike. Zala's fingers tightened around the armrest of her chair. She was watching the tactical map, seeing the Carrick's ships drift closer to their trap. "Now," Marcus said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Zala didn't hesitate. She gave the order to activate the secondary jamming system, and instantly, the Carrick's fleet was cut off from their communication network. The Author ships had already positioned themselves to strike, and without the ability to coordinate, the Carricks were left in disarray. Within moments, the once feared Carrick's fleet was reduced to chaos. Their movements erratic and unfocused, Zala watched as the Carrick's ships began to break apart. One by one, the Author fleet, following Marcus's careful plan, moved in with precision, cutting off the Carrick's escape routes. The battle was over before it had truly begun. The Carrick's had been defeated not by brute force, but by strategy, by thinking ahead and using the strength of their opponent's predictability against them. Zala felt a rush of relief flood through her. The crisis had been averted. The Author were safe, and Marcus had saved them. As the Author fleet returned to base, Zala couldn't help but look at Marcus with a new sense of admiration. The man who had once seemed so humble, so modest, had proven himself to be far more than just a diplomat. He was a tactician, a strategist, and someone who understood the true meaning of strength. As they made their way back to the palace, Zala turned to Marcus. "You knew exactly what to do," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "You outsmarted them. You saved the entire empire." Marcus smiled, but there was no pride in his expression. "We did it together, Your Majesty. You trusted me, and we both played our parts." Zala nodded, still absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened. She had always seen Marcus as a man of peace, someone who avoided conflict whenever possible. But today, she had seen another side of him, a side that could lead, that could make decisions that would change the course of history. She had married a modest man, but she was beginning to realize that there was nothing ordinary about him. As the evening settled in and the stars began to shine above the palace, Zala and Marcus sat together in the garden. There were no words needed between them. The victory had spoken for itself. For the first time since the beginning of her reign, Zala felt that the galaxy had no limits for what she and Marcus could achieve together. She had married a man who would stand beside her, not just as a partner, but as someone who could change the very fabric of their world. And in that moment, Zala knew that their future would be shaped by the quiet strength that Marcus Flynn possessed, a strength that had already proven to be more than anyone had ever expected. The victory over the Carricks was only the beginning of something greater. In the days that followed, Queen Zala and Marcus Flynn were hailed as heroes across the Author Empire. The people marveled at how the once quiet and modest diplomat had outsmarted the ruthless Carricks, saving the Empire from what could have been a devastating war. Zala's faith in Marcus had been rewarded, and their partnership had proven to be more powerful than anyone could have imagined. But as the celebration settled and the weight of their responsibilities returned, Zala found herself thinking more and more about Marcus. She had come to understand his brilliance and strategy, his ability to think quickly under pressure. What surprised her, though, was the calm way he handled everything. He never boasted, never sought praise for his actions. Even after saving countless lives, he remained as humble as ever, often deflecting credit to others. She began to realize that there was much more to Marcus than she had initially known. She had always thought of him as a simple man, a diplomat who had a talent for negotiation and peaceful resolution. But what she had seen in their most recent battle suggested that there were hidden layers to him. His strategic mind, his ability to outthink the Carricks, and his decision to take the lead in the battle, all of this showed a side of Marcus that was more than just an ambassador. Zala had seen his gentleness, his ability to listen, and his calm demeanor, but she hadn't yet seen the depth of his past. She felt an urge to know more about him, to understand how he had become the man who stood beside her. One evening, after the excitement of the battle had worn off, Zala decided to ask Marcus about his past, the life he had left behind on Earth. She found him in their private quarters, reading a report from the Author military. As always, he was calm, his focus sharp, but his mind seemed distant. as if he were lost in thought. She approached him quietly, sitting down across from him. Marcus looked up, meeting her gaze with a soft smile, though she could see a hint of something behind his eyes that spoke of unspoken experiences. "I've been thinking," Zalra began, her voice gentle. "You've never spoken much about your past, about Earth. You've shown me your brilliance in strategy and leadership, but I feel like there's a part of you I don't know." Marcus set the report aside, his expression unreadable. There was a brief silence between them as he seemed to weigh her words carefully. Zalra could sense that there was more to him than he let on, and she was curious to understand the man who had become her partner. "My past?" Marcus repeated softly. He looked down, his fingers tapping against the side of the table. "I suppose it's not something I talk about much." "There's not much to say, really." Zalra leaned forward slightly, her eyes searching his face for answers. "But I want to know. I want to understand you. I know you've done much for the author and for me, but I think there's more you haven't shared." Marcus let out a slow breath and nodded, as if coming to a decision. "It's not that I don't want to share it with you, Zalra. It's just that I've spent so long trying to forget that part of my life. I've chosen a different path, one of peace. But I suppose if anyone deserves to know, it's you." He sat back in his chair, his eyes clouded for a moment as memories from his past resurfaced. Zalra sat in silence, waiting for him to speak, giving him the space he needed. "I wasn't always a diplomat," Marcus began, his voice steady but tinged with something deeper. "I grew up on Earth in a time of great conflict. Wars were common small skirmishes at first, but they escalated. I was drafted into the military when I was just a young man. I didn't have much of a choice, but I learned quickly. I was trained in combat tactics, leadership, and survival. The military wasn't the life I wanted, but it was the life I had." Zalra listened intently, her heart aching as she realized how different Marcus's early life must have been. He had never once spoken of his time on Earth in detail, and she had never pushed him to. But now, hearing him speak of it, she could feel the weight of those years in his words. "I served in many conflicts," Marcus continued, his voice quiet but firm. "Some were small, others. They were much worse. I was part of special forces, so the missions I went on were classified. I never spoke of them to anyone, not even to my family. They didn't know the things I'd seen or the decisions I'd had to make. But I did it because I thought it was the right thing to do." Zalra could see that this was difficult for him, but she didn't interrupt. She didn't want to push him, but her desire to understand him fully was too strong. "What happened?" she asked softly. Marcus paused for a long time before answering, his eyes distant. "I came to a point where I couldn't do it anymore. I had seen enough destruction, enough pain. I wasn't the same person anymore. I had lost the man I was, the man I wanted to be. So, I left. I resigned from the military, disappeared for a while, and found a way to contribute without causing harm. I became a diplomat, working to find peaceful solutions instead of fighting. I thought I could leave the past behind, that I could start fresh. But sometimes you can't escape who you were." Zalra reached out and placed a hand on his. He didn't pull away, and she felt a deep sense of connection between them, as if his past had brought him to this moment. She understood now why Marcus had such a deep respect for peace, why he avoided conflict at all costs. He had witnessed the horrors of war firsthand, and that had shaped the man he was today. "You've been through so much," Zalra said softly, "but that's not who you are now. You're here with me, fighting for a better future." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's why I don't talk about it. I don't want to be defined by those years. I want to be defined by what we're building now. I want to be the man who stands beside you, who helps lead this empire into a new era of peace." Zalra squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of his past in her own heart. "You don't have to carry that alone anymore, Marcus. I'm here with you. I've seen who you are, and that's the man I want by my side." There was a long silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet understanding, a moment of connection that neither of them had expected. Marcus's past would always be a part of him, but Zalra knew that he had chosen to build a new future with her. They both had their pasts dark and difficult in different ways, but together, they could create something better. As the night grew late, they sat in the quiet of their room, the stars outside casting a soft glow over them. Zalra felt closer to Marcus than ever before. She had always known that there was more to him, but now she understood that he was not just a humble diplomat. He was a man who had fought for survival, for peace, and for a better world. And now, he was doing it again by her side. Together, they would face whatever came next. Together, they would build the future. The days following Marcus's revelation about his past brought an unexpected sense of closeness between him and Queen Zalra. She had always known that Marcus was more than what he appeared to be, but hearing his story gave her a deeper understanding of who he was and why he valued peace so deeply. It also reminded her that everyone carried a past, one that shaped them into the person they became. But that past did not have to define them forever. With the threat of the Carracks neutralized, the Author Empire was in a rare period of calm. For the first time in years, Zalra found herself with a moment of rest, a brief reprieve from the demands of leadership. She spent more time with Marcus, finding comfort in his presence. It was a different kind of strength, one that was not defined by power, but by integrity and wisdom. Yet, even in this calm, Zalra knew that the galaxy was unpredictable. Peace could never be taken for granted, especially in an empire as vast and diverse as hers. And though she trusted Marcus with her heart, she had always been a ruler first, and as much as she longed for peace, she understood the responsibility that came with her crown. One afternoon, Zalra sat in her council room, reviewing reports from various sectors of the empire. The Carracks were no longer an immediate threat, but there were still unrest and tensions in some of the outer territories. The Author Empire was large, and maintaining control over every system was no small task. Her advisors and generals had been pressing her for action. In the farthest reaches of their territory, where pirates and rogue factions had begun to stir trouble, Marcus, as always, was by her side, providing counsel with his calm and steady voice. He had grown more comfortable in his role as her partner in both matters of the heart and the empire. He never forced his ideas on her, but presented them in a way that respected her judgment and authority. Zalra, I know you want peace, Marcus said, his voice breaking the silence as she scanned through the data. But sometimes, to keep the peace, action is required. Zalra glanced up at him, her mind still occupied by the reports. She had hoped the situation would settle on its own, but she knew that ignoring the unrest would only make matters worse. I know, she replied, her voice heavy, but I fear that if we strike too quickly, we'll alienate the very people we're trying to protect. Marcus nodded, understanding her hesitation. You're right, every action has consequences, but if we don't act, we risk losing control of entire sectors. The pirates and rogue factions are starting to unite. The longer we wait, the stronger they'll get. And once they realize we're unwilling to act, they might think we're weak. Zalra leaned back in her chair, looking out at the stars through the large windows of her council room. I've never wanted to rule through fear. I've always believed that understanding, diplomacy, and compromise could hold the empire together. Marcus stood beside her, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the same stars. And you've built something remarkable, Zalra. You've shown that it's possible to rule with wisdom and compassion. But sometimes, we need to show that strength can coexist with peace. The Author respect power. If we don't act decisively, we risk losing their trust. Zalra's gaze softened as she considered his words. She had always valued Marcus's perspective, his ability to see beyond the immediate situation and understand the deeper, more complex forces at play. He had helped her navigate the tricky waters of leadership, reminding her that a ruler's strength came not only from their ability to command, but from their ability to adapt. I'm torn, Marcus, she admitted. I don't want to become what I fear, someone who uses force before all else. But you're right. If I do nothing, I risk losing everything. Marcus turned to face her, his expression gentle but resolute. I know you, Zalra. You don't have to sacrifice your principles to maintain peace. But sometimes, the greatest act of strength is to do what's necessary, even when it's difficult. You have the wisdom and the heart to lead us through this, and you don't have to do it alone." His words struck her deeply. Marcus wasn't just a partner in name. He was her equal, someone who saw her strengths and her vulnerabilities. He had never tried to overshadow her. Instead, he had always been there to offer support, to help her grow as a ruler, and to help her stay true to herself. "I'm afraid of losing the trust of my people," Zaura confessed. Her voice tinged with uncertainty. "If I order an attack, it might be seen as a betrayal of everything I've worked for." Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. "The people trust you because they believe in who you are, not just what you've done. They know you care for them, and that's why they follow you. They'll respect your decision, even if it's hard. You don't have to be perfect, Zaura. You just have to be real." Zaura looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. He was right. The author had always respected her because she had been honest with them, even when it was uncomfortable. And perhaps it was time for her to be honest with herself, to acknowledge that peace was not something that could be maintained through words alone. It had to be defended through action when necessary. "Thank you, Marcus," she said softly. "I don't know what I'd do without you." He smiled, his eyes warm with affection. "You do just fine, Zaura. You're already doing great things. I'm just here to help however I can." Later that day, Zaura called for a meeting with her top generals and advisors. It was time to make a decision. She couldn't delay any longer. The unrest in the outer territories had reached a boiling point, and if left unchecked, it could spiral into something far worse. The pirates were starting to organize, and the rogue factions were growing bolder. They would not hesitate to strike first if given the chance, after hours of discussion and debate. Zaura made her decision. She would authorize a limited military response to dismantle the pirate groups and quell the rogue factions. It would be swift and calculated, targeting their supply lines, and leadership to cut them off at the source. There would be no indiscriminate violence, but she would show the galaxy that the author would not hesitate to protect their people. As the plan was set into motion, Zaura felt a deep sense of resolve. She knew that this decision would not be without consequences, but she also knew that it was the right thing to do. She couldn't let fear or doubt guide her actions. She had to trust herself, trust Marcus, and trust the strength of the empire she had built. The following days were filled with tension as the author military moved into position. Zaura spent long hours at her command center, reviewing reports and coordinating the operation. Marcus was always by her side, offering guidance when needed. His calm presence a steady anchor in the midst of the storm. When the military action was completed, the results were clear. The pirates and rogue factions were significantly weakened. Their ability to cause chaos in the empire reduced. It was a success, but it came at a price. Some lives had been lost, and the empire would have to rebuild what had been damaged. Zaura knew that there would be no perfect solutions, no guarantees. But she had done what was necessary to protect her people. As the operation concluded, Zaura and Marcus stood together on the balcony of their palace, watching as the stars flickered overhead. The galaxy was still vast and unpredictable, but Zaura had a renewed sense of purpose. She had made difficult choices, and though they weighed heavily on her, she knew they were the right ones. "You did well, Zaura," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a note of pride. She smiled softly, turning to face him. "We did well, Marcus, together." They stood in silence, side by side, as the galaxy continued its endless dance around them. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they would face whatever came next together, with strength, wisdom, and the unwavering bond they had forged. The path ahead would not be easy, but with Marcus by her side, Zaura knew that they could face anything. And so, with the stars as their guide, they moved forward, ready for whatever challenges the galaxy might present.